Hello and welcome to my easy to understand guide to Marshall McLuhan's ideas about media and technology, particularly in relation to media ecology. This is not a set theorist on any media specification. However, it is super useful, and this is what I use it for teaching CIE media studies, particularly the media ecology topic on the second exam paper. One of the most famous things that Marshall McLuhan said was a phrase that he coined where he said, the medium is the message. Now, what this means is the way a message is communicated is more important than the message itself. When we talk about mediums, we talk about the kind of format of the media. So we talk about TV, we talk about newspapers, we talk about magazines, we talk about video games, we talk about social media. They are all different mediums. So the idea is that the actual content, for example, that we see within a newspaper, the actual article, isn't as important as considering the impact that printed newspapers themselves had on society. Marshall McLuhan actually developed these ideas back in the 60s, but we can apply them to social media now as well. The idea is, I suppose, that Marshall McLuhan would have thought that the individual posts on social media aren't that important. The actual technology, the medium of social media in general, is super important in terms of how much it's impacted our world. He tried to take quite an objective view of the media, so he wasn't necessarily considering whether technology was good or bad, but more just trying to determine what possible impacts it might have had. Just like Neil Postman, he also talked about technological determinism, the idea that technology has actually had a huge impact on developing our society and our culture. Marshall McLuhan also talked about different ages within society, so I'm going to try and explain these one by one to make it easy to understand. The first age he talks about is the tribal age. So this was kind of before technologies. If you think about kind of like cavemen and women, it was all verbal communication. We didn't even have a written language at that point. So lots of people would sit around campfires and talk, and that verbal communication was how we developed our skills and how we spread information to other people. It was quite unifying because we had to be with those people to talk to them. We couldn't get messages to people hundreds of miles away. So in the tribal age, our communication was quite unifying. We had to be together with those people, and we had to be very present with them. And it was quite a spontaneous thing. And then he started talking about the literacy age. This is when we started developing written word. So whether that is kind of writings on the side of a cave or whether it's physically writing in a book, whatever it might be, that's more of a private communication. We can communicate to ourselves, we can communicate to one other person. It's more individual, it's more independent. It can make you a bit more independent because you can go further away from your tribe. You can send them a letter. You can send, a note on horseback or however it is, and you didn't have to stay with your tribe. So people started to separate a little bit more. And then he started talking about the print age. So this is when we started inventing things like the newspaper printing press, magazines and things like that. And those printing presses means that we could start distributing information, not just to one person, but to lots of people. So we could create not just one newspaper to give to one person, but we could print that newspaper hundreds of thousands of times and get that message to a wide variety of people across our country, for example. And that meant that we were even more isolated and even more independent because we could move much further away from our families, our tribes, our communities, our villages. And we could stay in contact with them. We didn't even need to stay in contact with our own personal families. We could just read about it in the newspaper. So there was less and less personalised communication. And the idea is then he thought about the electronic age. Now, when McLuhan was talking about this, he was talking about things like TV and radio and potentially things like early video games. Now, the electronic distribution has meant that we can not just distribute to within our kind of country, but we can distribute globally all of that information. The idea is, I suppose, it's made us a bit more nosy. We can learn more about other countries, people we've never met before, we can find out information about. We can find out quite personal information about, particularly now that we as individuals can interact with social media and post ourselves, and it doesn't have to go through kind of traditional gatekeepers. Marshall McLuhan actually thought this connected people more, that the fact that we were more connected electronically, and he coined the term a global village. The idea that we don't have to be kind of an individual tribe, we're now a big global tribe. because we're connected with people from different countries and different cultures and different ethnicities and religions and all sorts of people from around the world, that we can communicate with them. And so he actually thought that technology kind of brought people together into this global community, global village. Marshall McLuhan also talked about 4 things we have to consider about the media. We have to consider whether it enhances our lives. Like, does it make things better in any way for anyone? And if so, what does it make better? What does it change for good for us? He also thinks you have to think about a new technology in whether or not it makes something obsolete. Obsolete means that it's kind of died out, it's not needed anymore. So does a new technology, for example, eradicate the need for an old technology? You know, when radio came in, a lot of people thought that newspapers might be made obsolete, but they carried on for a long time. A lot of people felt that TV made radio obsolete, and now a lot of people feel that streaming sites have made TV obsolete. So thinking about what it might have made less necessary or unnecessary completely. He also says you need to think about what a technology helps you retrieve from the past. That is, does it help you do something that used to be possible in the past but hasn't really been done for a while? So, for example, we used to have those interpersonal communications with people in our own little tribes, our own villages. And then when the printing press came along and television, perhaps it was more distant. We weren't really having proper personal communications anymore with individual people, but we were communicating with the masses. Maybe social media now has retrieved our ability to have one-on-one personal communications with people, but people who are much further away. So, you know, I can speak to somebody on the other side of the world and we can have a personal conversation and we can share our culture in a way that we used to do when we were kind of in our own little independent tribe. But now we can do that globally. So perhaps social media has retrieved our ability to hold personal communications, but now it is on a more global scale. And finally, he thinks you should consider what a technology has reversed, i.e. what it has changed completely, and maybe are we going backwards in some ways? So for example, some people believe that the introduction of a lot of music via streaming has put a lot of people off and they don't really enjoy it anymore. And some people are reverting back to things like vinyl, nostalgic ways of listening to music. So Marshall McLuhan is a really useful theorist for looking at in terms of media ecology and the effects that new technologies have had on our society. Don't forget to check out my channel for other videos that might be useful for you in terms of theories and other texts.